was a few weeks ago, and I had just finished a short run in the afternoon. I entered our backyard, crossed from the alley to the back door. I remembered that Amy's sister was probably just at that moment in a doctor's office finding out if she had uterine cancer. Amy was joining by phone from her home office. And a bunch of thoughts run through my head. Amy's mom had uterine cancer. If her sister has it, what does that mean for my wife? Should I be worried about her getting cancer? Because I am. Should she get a hysterectomy to be safe? I don't know. How cranky is she going to be if she has even minor surgery and can't go running for a week or two? Very. If her sister's sick, will Amy be gone a lot, like she was when her mom was dying? What should I do to make that easier for both of us? How much will that suck for me? And just as I reached the doorknob, it hit me. What am I doing? In a matter of seconds, the span of maybe, I don't know, I can't measure very well without a tape measure, 30 feet, I'd made someone else's impending cancer diagnosis about me. I stood there on the step in my backyard and told myself, this is not my story. Brené Brown says that we humans are wired for story. She's right, I think. But I'm not sure the wiring is entirely consistent, entirely mutual. Now, I don't know a lot about electrical things, so this metaphor is going to fall apart. I can tell you that right now. But when I say it's not entirely mutual, what I mean is that the wiring is strongest for us telling our stories to other people, or like I did in my backyard that afternoon, to ourselves. The wiring is less robust, a lighter gauge, to abuse the metaphor, for taking in other people's stories. But stories are how people connect. There really isn't any other way for us to share our experience in the world than to tell our stories to each other and to hear them. But how strong a connection we build depends to a great extent on how we take in that other person's story. As Brené Brown puts it, stories are only a form of connection when someone's listening and hearing us. Like the rabbit in both of this morning's readings. And there's a lot going on that can get in the way of truly listening and hearing in all of our lives, in all of our heads. It's hard to get out of our own narratives long enough to let someone else's story stand on its own. In her book, Marriage Confidential, Pamela Haag recalls a phone call she received one morning from her friend Josie. "I'm fuming," Josie declares on her way to the office. She'd been with an old friend the night before. The friend wanted to talk to someone about trouble in her marriage. Josie came away from that conversation fuming, in her words, because she felt judged by her friend because she, Josie, had gotten a divorce. Now, the story her friend told wasn't about divorce or about Josie at all. The story Josie heard, on the other hand, made Josie the lead character. I've done the same thing over sillier issues. Yeah, Amy and I are both runners. And for the last couple of years, for no particular reason other than probably a certain level of laziness that I'm not terribly proud of, I've been running a lot less. Amy has stuck with her daily runs, including every week a longer run of 10 or more miles. When Amy tells me about a run, and yes, runners tell each other about runs, we are great fun at parties. So when she's telling me about one, I sometimes get mad and defensive because what I hear is judgment about how lazy I am for not getting out and running that day, or for not running as far as she does. And I guarantee right? That's not what Amy's saying. It's certainly not what she's saying, and I don't think it's what she's thinking. But I'm filtering her story through my own. We all do it. Now, Brene Brown, I think, would say that that filter is shame. And she posits in a different video than the one we showed here today that human connection is this continuum, with empathy on one end and shame at the other. And vulnerability is the slider or the dial in between. The more vulnerable we can be, the more we turn that dial to empathy. The more empathetic we are, and the better we can absorb someone's story without making it about our own fears of failure or inadequacy or judgment. Shame, Brown says, breeds three things: fear, blame, and disconnection. And our world, our nation, our communities are rife with fear, blame, and disconnection. We can't talk about race in this country, for example. Can't seem to make meaningful progress in healing the wounds from slavery and Jim Crow and oppression because white people can't hear the stories of non-whites and their experience in this country without fear of judgment, of blame. We can't listen to what white supremacy has done to our fellow human beings without making it about us and how we feel. I mean, there are laws being passed in this country, in state houses, that are banning education that makes people feel bad. That's shame. It's not empathy. But don't get cocky, my fellow liberals. It's not just the conservatives. As Robin DiAngelo points out in White Fragility, white progressives can be the most difficult for people of color because to the degree we think we have arrived, we will put our energy into making sure that others see us as having arrived. It's about how woke we are instead of what the people we hope we are serving truly need in their stories. An example of that, outside of the context of race, is how many of us resisted using the pronoun they on the grounds that, well, it's so confusing. And I was one of them. That wasn't about, in this moment when people are trying and finally getting the opportunity in this country to be their whole selves. We're making it about us and our discomfort with grammar. And yes, I was a copy editor, so I'm a bit of a dork on grammar, but I can get over it. But truly hearing others' stories is an act of faith. William Ellery Channing saw human life as a central, fundamental source of knowledge of God, because in his view, every human being reflects the image of God. But as Reverend Rebecca Parker notes in the book A House for Hope, once human experience becomes a starting point for imagining God, it becomes important to ask whose human experience is authoritative and what experience. The plot thickens even further when essentialist notions of universal human nature give way to complex and particularized understandings of gender, gender expression, race, culture, and class as socially and historically constructed. And if we're going to answer those questions, then when people who have been kept to the margins share their stories with us, give us that gift, our first task is to not make it about us. As UU minister Reverend Sunshine Wolf says in a video that I watched recently, you don't need to proclaim or show how much of an ally or advocate you are. It's fine to not know what it's like to be black or gay or trans or 75 years old. knowing that isn't your job in that moment. Now, Reverend Wolf was talking specifically about ministering to people who have experienced depression in that particular video. But the message has a broad reach, I think, a broader reach than that. Now, I like the Brene Brown video we just watched, but I do have a nit. When that bear climbs down into the dark hole with the fox, she says, "Hey, I know what it's like down here." I'm not so sure you can fully hear someone's story if you start from, "I know what it's like." The moment I tell someone, "I know what it's like," I've forgotten that in this moment, this is not about me or what I think I know. This, right now, right here, this is not my story. Knowing is not my job. My job, as Reverend Wolf concludes, is to listen and hear and reflect back the story of the person before me. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing more, nothing less. But to truly hear someone's story, my friends, that ain't nothing. In her poem, Black Girl Blues, Melissa C. Jeter writes, "I could be invisible, and I thought for a long time that I was. As I was looking out and they were looking upon, what? What did they see? And their mind is so full of scientific designs and enlightenment, they know, so they are closed to me. They know, so they are closed to me." One of the greatest gifts we can ever give someone is to realize, to admit, we don't know. To bear the vulnerability that comes with not knowing. And in that vulnerability, to see the other in their pain or joy or anger or struggle or whatever it is that they bring to us. That is what one author called the alchemy of being seen. Theologian Paul Tillich wrote about sin as separation. Separation from God, separation from each other. The purpose of religion and faith is to find the grace to close that distance, to rebuild and maintain connection, to, in a way, see God in each other. Now, when I use the term, I don't mean God as in, God. I mean it more the way Forrest Church put it when he said, God is not God's name. God is our name for that which is in each, but greater than all. I mentioned Ellery Channing earlier, and Channing and I do not believe in the same kind of God. Well, Channing has been dead for a couple of hundred years. He's not really actively believing in anything, more than likely. But he saw God as a loving father figure. I don't see God as a figure, a separate individual being at all. But still, Channing's vision of every one of us reflecting God holds true for me. Because to the extent I see God at all, it is as our creation together. As I've said in previous sermons, John wrote in his gospel that God is love. Yes. But God is also fear and hate and indifference, compassion and curiosity, wonder and apathy. God is us and the stories we share, the stories we tell and those we hear. Consciously, or more likely unconsciously, we make God in our image. And if the God we make is one of connection, of hearing stories, then that God can be, in the words of philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead, the fellow sufferer who understands. if that is the God we want to manifest in the world, then when, in moments of loss or vulnerability, when someone has the courage to share their story with us, we need to let them, to hear them, with no more response than our presence and the message that they are heard and they are loved. As Brene Brown put it in this morning's video, I don't know what to say right now. I'm just glad you told me. And I struggle with that. I am by nature a fixer. And to be able to just take something in is something that I'm working on. You know, Brene Brown finished this morning's video with this: rarely can a response make something better. What makes things better is connection. Our presence, our attention builds that connection. The rabbit in the story Amy read this morning just sat there and listened to broken-hearted Taylor. Edward the China doll bunny didn't say a word when his friends shared the names of the ones they loved. And in his listening, his heart opened wide and then wider still. So, Reverend Laura's been asking us to come away from services with a sparklet. I guess if you take one thing away from today, let it be this: be a bunny. Amen. So may it be.